Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the podcast. My name is Jeremy, and this is Divergence Media. So tonight we're going to be talking about an article that was written from a Pennsylvania law professor that goes by the name of Larry Backer. The name of this paper that he wrote is Next Generation Law, Data-Driven Governance and Accountability-Based Regulatory Systems in the West and Social Credit Regimes in China. So this is a pretty shocking paper that this man wrote. And while it's only the opinion of one man, the reason why I wanted to bring it to you tonight is because this is starting to set the precedent for the new wave of the agenda. Okay? I wanted to bring it to you so you can just understand what could potentially be coming in the future. And we're also going to take a look at some of the ways that they're already starting to push what he's talking about in this paper. But before we get into that, well, first, let me say hello to Mr. Cliff. Cliff Rockefeller is here with us tonight as well, as always. Mr. Cliff, how you doing tonight? Or this afternoon for you?
Pretty good. Yep. Thanks a lot. Yep. Hope everyone's doing well.
Awesome. So, before we totally get into this, first thing I want to do is let's just take a look at who this man is, because we can go through everything that he's writing about, but anybody can write about anything. So it's really only significant if it's somebody of importance putting this information out there, right? So let's just start there. We're going to take a look just at his Wikipedia page. Let's see who Larry Backer is. Larry Backer is a Cuban-American legal scholar and professor of law and international affairs. He holds a professorship at the Penn State University and is the W. Richard and Mary Eshelman Faculty Scholar Professor of Law and International Affairs, Penn State Law and School of International Affairs, Pennsylvania State University. He also works for Ashgate Publishing, Globalization Law and Policy Series Editor, and the Executive Director of the Washington-based NGO Coalition for Peace and Ethics. Okay? A prominent comparative corporate and international law scholar and a leading researcher in constitutional law. Professor Backer is a member of the American Law Institute and the European Corporate Governance Institute. He has served as a great peer reviewer for the Hague Institute of the Internationalization of Law in the Netherlands, Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and others. Okay, I've gotten online, done a little bit of research on this guy, just watched some papers that he's done. He's a massive globalist. Almost everything that he does is based around globalism, and so we're going to find out that is the case. Now, to give you a brief understanding of what all of this is about, Larry Backer is advocating for a social credit system similar to that in China in the United States. Now, if you're just not familiar with what the China social credit system is, let me just give you kind of a brief rundown of what that looks like. So they are still in the works of fully implementing this now, but all of the cameras throughout the city have facial recognition software. So if they're walking anywhere they're at in the cities, as they're walking around doing things, they're getting tracked by their government using facial recognition. Now, the way that they act, the things that they buy, everything that they do is monitored, and it is accredited to a social credit score, okay? So, for example, if somebody plays too many video games, their social credit score can go down. If they buy unhealthy foods, their social credit score can go down. If you speak poorly about your government, your social credit score is likely to completely tank. Now, utilizing all of these things and crediting them with a social credit score, if their social credit score goes low, they will actually take their face and paint it on big poster boards throughout the city to let everyone know in the area who the people are that have low social credit scores. Now, if you have a low social credit score and I am communicating with you and speaking to you, that also negatively affects my social credit score. So this is a system designed in order to literally shun the people that go against the grain of society, that are not cooperating and in their eyes are not productive members of society. They are shunned by the community because nobody wants to communicate with them or have anything to do with them because it'll run their social credit score down. Now you may ask yourself, well, what does this social credit score do? This determines what kind of rates they get if they can get loans. It determines if they can even buy bus tickets or airplane tickets. And in some cases, you could even say they may not be able to buy food. They may not be able to get internet. It affects their internet speeds. It literally determines everything that they buy, everything that they do is based off of this social credit system. The only way that they can get their social credit system back is to do things like donating money to charities that the government of course runs, and they of course have no way of knowing where this money actually goes, but they'll go down there every month anyways and donate money just so they can get their social credit score back up. Okay, now of course this sounds exactly like the George Orwellian 1984 society that we're talking about, and you're going to say to yourself, there's no way that has ever come into the United States. If our government in the United States ever tried something like that, surely people would shoot it down. And you're right. And that's where we get into this paper, because what Larry Backer is going to tell us here in this paper is that he's not advocating for that. He's advocating for a different type of society that would replicate that, but implement it in a different way. So let's just break right in here. Before I do, Cliff, is there anything that you would like to add before we get into this paper just about the social credit system in China or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah, it's basically showing people that have caught a whiff of this stuff how sick a socialist system actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Because the stepping stone towards this type of tyranny where everything is controlled, your whole diet, even down to what you may think, even, and what you express, because you're always being watched and that over there, their facial recognition. But the sick thing is, really, the whole thing starts out on a basis of collective punishment. And that's what's happening everywhere now. Like the shooter in Christchurch. Some crazy guy gets a gun, shoots a whole lot of people, and then everyone has to pay. It has done nothing. No one's done anything. So that is collective punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a socialist, almost Soviet Union type of system.
Yes.
So what they do, and just before you get into the article, so what they do is they always implement a different strategy to get to the same result if they're dealing with a different culture. So they're going to need to do a different implementation in China than they would America, because the cultures are different completely. So that's on the face of it. But he just told you then, it's going to be pretty much the end of it is going to be the same as in China. Well, no shit. He's just told you the truth.
Yep. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. Different cultures act different ways. That means that different cultures will be willing to accept different things than others. So, for example, in the United States, these people are very intelligent. That's something you have to understand. And one of the underlying just principles, I suppose you could say, of the majority of the people in the United States is freedom. And it is a certain set of principles that they say private businesses should be allowed to do whatever it is that they want to do. Well, that can be utilized against us. And we're going to actually learn a little bit about that. Now, I'm not saying that private sector businesses should not be allowed to do what they want to do, but they will twist that and utilize it for their own agenda. Okay, so that, they will literally have people making that argument while the private sector companies are working on behalf of the government. So let's break in. We're going to take a look here. We're going to go back to the screen capture. We're going to go back and take a look here. We're going to start looking at some quotes so we can get right into this article. And this is pretty linear. And if you guys are in the Discord server, I will be sharing the PDF of this later on tonight, so you can go through and read this entire paper yourself. And I really want you to, I highly encourage you to do so. There's way more content in this that I can't cover all of this, and I've got a ton of material to cover with you already, and this is barely even touching the surface. Okay, so legal subjects must be made to obey. They are no longer presumed to do so unless evidence to the contrary is produced, and that compulsion no longer comes at the point of a gun or in the uttering of individual representations of the legitimate authority of the state. Instead, it comes through the gaze, systems of constant observation combined with a self-awareness of being constantly observed that together coerces a particular set of behaviors tied to the character of the observation. Okay, so his assessment here is that if you are constantly being monitored, constantly being observed, your character will reflect that. Okay, so he's making the case right here that we can no longer presume that you will be good. We cannot presume that people will do as they should, and that people should be constantly monitored, and that will keep you honest. That will keep you from doing bad things. And so in his mind, it is a preemptive type of law, because Big Brother is always watching you, and that'll keep you from doing anything, right? So right off the bat, this sets the very tone of the rest of this paper. This is pretty early on, but it tells you right up front where his mind is at. And as we read through this, I also want to point out that the way he writes is very similar to that of the Communist Manifesto. Okay, and you'll get that vibe a little bit more, not just reading these individual quotes that I've pulled out, but if you read the actual article itself or the paper itself, you will come to the conclusion that yes, if you've actually read the Communist Manifesto, I think you'll probably come to the conclusion that he was at least encouraged by it a bit. So yeah, this really sets the tone, and we'll go to the next quote here. So we got a lot to get through. It applies with equal vigor in the private sector as well. Hello there. Tencent, for example. So this is to all you gamers, okay? So as Cliff just pointed out, there's going to be changes in the way it comes. There's a difference between how they're going to address this in China and how they're going to address this in the United States. In the United States, we cannot have government doing it because the United States is the people in the United States, of course, would rebel and say absolutely not. So the goal here is he wants to see more of a divide between private sector businesses and the United States government actually working together and sort of dividing up that power so that it doesn't seem so obvious. Okay, and so here's an example. It applies with equal vigor in the private sector as well. Tencent is zooming in on the credit structure in a sector it's dominating, gaming. The world's largest game developer by revenue just launched a credit rating system for online game players, according to an announcement made on its Weibo. I don't know what that is. The object is to manage demand upwards, but social credit analytics are also constructed to maximize the value of the product. According to the firm, the scores are evaluated on a monthly basis from several aspects, including completeness of account information, activity, gaming assets, security contribution, and cheating behaviors. Spending more time in-game, real-name authentication, and reporting cheating by others would help evaluate the credit score. Cheating, spreading illegal information, and using bad language will reduce the score. It follows that the reward and punishment system is also geared to increasing demand in corporate income. Players with high scores will be able to get chances to join international tests of new games and get virtual presence. Okay, so this is just a small example of how they're talking about doing these things. If you're using bad language in the game, if you're doing different things that are if you're cheating or spreading illegal information, etc., etc. If you're doing anything negative at all in this game, Tencent is already trying to implement this. Now, Tencent is doing this on under the name of getting rid of online bullying or online cheating, etc., etc., illegal activity. So they will find ways at the private sector to say, look, we need to improve the experience for all users, right? We want all users to be happy. It's the collective that we're worried about. We're not at all concerned about providing a platform for the individual to decide. You don't have the right to decide if you get to, use the voice chat in a game, or you don't get the, if you don't want to play the game because of this or that. Well, tough luck. We're going to just blanket cover all of this so that everybody can have a good experience. Now, this is just a small example, of course. This is just one that he's giving as an example. But we see some of this stuff already, right? So, Cliff, earlier you talked about um, sort of a collective punishment, right?
Yeah, well, the whole thing reeks of carrot and stick, as they
Mm-hmm.
call it here, or
Mm-hmm.
punishment and reward.
Mm-hmm.
So we're already in a system similar. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
already in a carrot and stick punishment reward system. We're already in a socialist system already. Most of the whole world pretty much is.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, anywhere where there's collectivism in a quote unquote state is socialism, really. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're going to get the hierarchies, you're going to get the classes. Will that go away with a credit system? No, because you still got punishment reward. So you'll get the goody two shoes that obey, and you'll still get a real private sector. When they say public private partnerships, which is what they're doing, that's the new utopia,
Mm-hmm.
is uh, is their word private truly private? I say no, it's not.
Sure.
Private is private. There's no, it's like saying sovereign citizen, public private. They're two different things. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's a public private partnership, by default it becomes public. So that's a little mind game they're playing already.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So anything that you really do, a good example of that would be if you are in a public space, you can be recorded legally in the United States. You can be recorded. So if you are not within your home or on your private property, and even then there's laws that say that somebody can record you so long as they're not actually intruding into your home. Law enforcement can record so long as they're not actually on your property. They can legally record anything from another property on your property and record anything you're doing. So as far as privacy goes, you're actually a lot more limited than you think you are. If you're in the private sector or if you're in the public, almost anything that you're doing is really public, so long as you're in the public. And that's
Sure.
legally in the United States. So that, of course, means that anything that you're doing in the public realm can be recorded and analyzed and put into an algorithm, right? Which is what they're after here is that, computer systems can analyze everything that you are doing, build algorithms based off of that, and determine if you are a productive member of society or if you are, one of us, the black sheep. So let's go to the next part here because like I said, I've still got a lot to get through here. Unfortunately, there's just so much in this. I wanted to get as much as I could so that you guys could get an idea of everything that this guy has to say. It is also important to remember that the form of governmentality follows the normative basis for political organization. Social credit and rating systems can have an inherently distinct socialist and Western character, grounded in the political ideologies of each system and the customs and traditions of the specific state in which it is used. In the West, that governance power of surveillance and control has been fractured. In the West, one can expect social credit systems to remain the province of private enterprises as well as of state organs. One can expect a growing coordination of efforts, but it is unlikely that a centralized social credit system will emerge, even as the aggregation of all social credit subsystems will effectively change the aggregate character of governance in Western societies. In China, the forms of governmentality are going in the opposite direction. One can expect centralization through the state and the construction outbound of cooperative partnerships with private enterprises, whose own subsystems can be integrated with the overall state system, even as is permitted at a certain autonomy within its specific area of activity. Okay, so unfortunately, he makes a case, but there was nowhere that I could really quote to bring it all into context. But this is what and if you read the paper, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You'll see what he's doing. What he is advocating for on the grand scale of things is that government will not regulate people, but government will regulate private sector businesses into implementing these type of systems. So Walmart, Kmart, Sears, all of these big box stores, transportation companies, Uber, food places, all of these guys, what they want to do is regulate them. And so there's there's sort of a hierarchy here that they will regulate these companies into implementing things like this.
Yep. collective. There's a collective power again. There, they're collectivizing or going for established collective
Hmm.
environments, and then use them. This is what they've done for hundreds of years. They've been. Who was it? Was it Albert Pike or one of them? It could have been Albert Pike, and he said, why establish your own grassroots establishment to take over the world when you can already infiltrate ones that are already built?
Right.
So
Right.
that's really what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because he recognizes that if they try to implement something like that, like exactly like we see in China, the people are going to rebel. They're not going to have that. However, we can see these things are already coming. Consider this: as we're having these mass shootings, we already see private sector businesses working against the people, and Walmart just quit selling 5.56 and 2.23 ammunition, right, to get rid of the ammunition for AR-15s. And people will make the argument and say, well, but they're private sector business. They have the right to do whatever they want. And they're correct. However, our corporations in the United States, and I can comfortably say are, because if you live in the United States, you're affected by these corporations no matter if you want to or not. These massive corporations in the United States, they are a huge power. They're just as powerful, maybe more powerful than the government itself or the system itself. They are massively impactful on your life. So if all of these companies work together and they actually implement some sort of technological security system, for example, Walmart, if you go in there, everywhere you go in Walmart, of course, there's cameras monitoring everything you do, right? And so it's not completely unfeasible to say that all of these private sector companies can work together to create a system like this. In fact, there is a new system already for local bars. I don't know the name of the system. I forget the name of the system, but and many bars are utilizing this. If you go, let's say you go into a bar that is utilizing this app or whatever, this software, and you pitch a fit in this bar, you make an ass of yourself, you get drunk, you get kicked out, right? Well, you get put on a blacklist. Now, any other bar that is using that app, when you go in and you go to the front door of that bar and you go to check in, they check your ID and they reference it against this list and they make sure that you're not on a blacklist. If you are on that blacklist, that bar will reject you. Now, that is regardless of if there was, a Buffalo Wild Wings and a different Buffalo Wild Wings. That's irrelevant. Any bar that participates in this, whether it's the same owners or not, can all look at this information. And it doesn't matter who puts the information in. Any bar can put this information in, and that can potentially keep you from getting into any bar that has that software. You won't get, will not get in. Now, I am sure that software is likely to grow more and more and more for your major bars anyways. So it's those kind of systems that they want to implement, and I see that's probably how they're going to do it in the United States.
Sure. And let's not forget that the a lot of the people that are listening will be adults to this
Mm-hmm.
show, and we mustn't forget that even though you might not support a bar or a shop or whatever that does this, you probably boycott it. It's the children they want. So you might avoid it, but the upcoming young are going to be buying into this stuff.
Yep. Yep. So I think you've probably, the old saying goes, what one generation tolerates, the next generation embraces, right? And I think that tends to become pretty true. So I think that's probably coming quicker than we'd like to think. So here's the next little piece, because this is really going to be interesting. You guys are going to get a kick out of this one, because we are going to talk about microchips. In the West, social credit takes on a variety of forms, sometimes, but not always, driven by the private sector and supported by the growth of markets and data. Microchipping individuals is one manifestation, rather untaken by the state or any private enterprises. Reports from the U.S. in 2017 noted how one U.S. tech firm is offering to install rice-sized microchips in its employees' hands. Once an employee has the chip voluntarily installed, he or she can purchase in the break room, open doors, and log into computers. In 2018, it was reported that Swedes were eager to be microchipped for the convenience of, among other things, public transport. The technology itself is not new. In fact, Swedes and others have been using microchips this way since at least 2015. Even before then, groups of people have been meeting at implant parties, often organized by larger companies, to hook themselves up. And the chips are similar to the ones veterinarians implant in dogs and cats so that their owners can find them in case they run away. So here's a little article. This is what they're talking about. This is the Wisconsin company to install rice-sized microchips in employees. A Wisconsin technology company is offering its employees microchip implants that can be used to scan into the building and purchase food at work. Whether or not to get a chip is up to the employees to decide. Okay, so there's a couple things here. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. I'm sure this is not new to you, but we also know that Amazon, for example, is setting up convenience stores, and they're doing some test runs on these convenience stores where you don't actually have to pay for anything. There's no employees at this store. When you go in, the store automatically recognizes your phone. It recognizes that you're in the store, and everything that you pick up, when you walk back out of the store, it registers all those things, and it automatically charges your account. Now imagine that you have a private sector business that has deemed that your social credit score is too low, and you go in there and you want to purchase products, but it automatically recognizes that your social credit score is low. So the little window that you want to reach into to get your gallon of milk or whatever, the door won't open for you. And if someone else tries to hand you goods, well, their social credit score is going to go low, and they will, of course, be arrested and sent to jail. And even if you somehow or another find a way to leave that place with food, you'll be sent to jail. This is just a picture of how these things could be implemented. Okay, and I understand it right now it sounds somewhat hyperbolic, but keep in mind this is literally what they're talking about: is to control your behavior, control your thoughts, control everything that you do in your life, with the threat of these types of punishments, that they will have control over these aspects of your life, and that is the leverage that they push against you to make you comply to the law, to make you comply to how they want you to behave and think, and how they want you to speak. It's very terrifying. It's very scary. And it's the private sector companies, at least in the West and the United States, that are setting up the platforms that they will utilize to make these things happen. We don't see the government doing these things. It's the private sector companies that are really somewhat terrifying with this in the West. So
yeah. I mean, well, the government. We probably haven't gone over much detail on it yet, but basically the government, and we can see it if you go and look at your previous presidents, prime ministers, etc., you'll see that they get a golden key when they leave office, especially if they're right up there in the political game. And they are involved with the big international corporations.
Sure.
They're in and out of politics and the corporations, so they're one and the same.
Yep. Well, a good example to actually understand how a lot of this works is, I think generally speaking, people probably have this idea that there's a hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy is the government, and below that hierarchy is the corporations. But really, nothing could be farther from the truth. If you want a good example, I think they're probably pretty even, right? Because we know that lobbyists go and lobbyists lobby to politicians, and they are really what gets them elected, of course, if that's even such a thing. I don't know. They might probably just be chosen, but I don't want to go into that. Nevertheless, we know that corporations lobby. Corporations literally write bills that our politicians put into place, and it just happens, right? We just know these things. That's a topic for a different day, but we know that these things happen. And a good example right now, how the politicians can place leverages against corporations, and corporations can place leverages against politicians, is what's going on, of course, with Joe Biden and the Ukraine and these gas companies. We know that politicians profit greatly off of private sector. So the hierarchy is not how you think it is. Sure, the government might have a bit more authority over the private sector. However, make no mistake about it, those politicians wouldn't be where they're at all if it wasn't for the very corporations putting them there. Okay, so the hierarchy is not quite how you think it is. It's a little bit different. And again, like we spoke about before, another good thing to look at that and the cooperation that exists between the two is, once again, John Perkins, the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You have to remember that after the 53 coup in Iran by the CIA, when they decided that was a bad idea because of the risk that the government would be taking if they were caught, they turned to the private sector to execute the very same things. So
yeah, I mean, it's really down to knowledge. I mean, you could almost view the public sector with its politicians as just a big registry, a big, massive registry. And it has mechanics in that machine or industry, the registration, And so the people are nudged to want certain legislation that is then registered and enforced by people again. So the corporations, they can afford the best lawyers. They can afford the best accountants and financiers, which are just playing with figures, playing with words, especially the lawyers. So they can go into government and get agreement with whoever's doing the registration, because technically government's neutral. It's meant to be. That's why people vote. The people bias this and bias that. So, but the why we're outgunned is because these massively rich, powerful, well-connected people that run these corporations that nudge us to go and buy their stuff, which is double-edged and weaponized, then they can control the government, which is just the dead registration. They do have judges in their pocket because they'll get I think we went over it before, they get a of necessity crisis, and then of necessity of intervention and invention of things to present to the public that then is consented to. Oh, there's no other way. Oh, okay. Like the climate thing. Oh, we'll spray the skies, but it's going to cost you. Or, the Cold War, they're going to get you, or it's going to cost you. So that's all they're doing. And then the government stamps it into law because it says, well, it's the best we can do for the people.
And I think you're nailing it. Yeah, I think you're nailing it. It's, if you think about this, when we're talking about the media and advertising and all these things controlling the minds of people and really shifting public opinion, that is not the government that is actually physically executing that. That is the private sector businesses. It's the private sector. It's the private sector that is buying the marketing. It's the private sector that makes these movies that shift public opinion. It's the private sector that controls the minds of the people, not the government.
That's right. Absolutely. And now go back to the government or the registration again, and you'll probably have who's the best one to make the judgment on the registration of anything. The judge, the high court judges and things like that. So the judges and lords and that are obviously in on it because they're super smart and they've probably got a hand in these corporations. So you know what I mean? So it turns out it's intelligence and well-connected people. That's all you need. Is it to influence the rest of the people through brute force or through quid pro quo even. They love that, quid pro quo. Hey, we'll give you this. It's a crisis, but we'll give you this. Oh, okay, we'll take it. It's simple as that. Yeah, that's how they do it.
So let's keep going here. We've got we've got 4 more quotes. And then I've got a couple of videos I want to show you guys to kind of tie all this together. So let's take a look here at this quote. It's tempting to think that this government overreach is purely reserved to China. After all, they did just forfeit significant freedom by electing Xi Jinping president for life. This is incorrect thinking. The rest of the world is steps away from trailing the Chinese into a surveillance state. With incredible data collection, the plumbing is already in place for such a system to take hold. Our tech companies catalog large quantities of data on everyone. As we saw with Cambridge Analytica in the 2016 election, this data can be used to steer particular viewpoints. It's not a far cry to imagine information being used to control viewpoints. So this goes exactly to what we're just talking about We know that Facebook collects big data on everybody. They are building algorithms to basically understand the human condition. They want to understand why people make the decisions that they do, and just understand everything that there is to understand about the mind. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. I believe they want to collect as much data about the human mind and the human condition as they possibly can, because this is what's going to help them build the ultimate AI, the ultimate
Yeah.
artificial intelligence, a collective gathering of every human being on the planet to build the ultimate AI. And then
Mm.
from that, it will build its own algorithms to be able to determine what cultures do what's the best way to respond to different cultures, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's almost like a breathing, like this global. We'll call it a global system. I don't even call it government. It's a system. So the system breathes almost. When it pushes out its breath, it's propagandizing you and gaslighting you with what it thinks will suit the minds of the public. That it already, and they're already doing this. That where they've grabbed all the data through surveys, voting, any information that they can get from you. Like even carrot and stick again at the supermarket, they give you little cards for discounts. You go to the shop and you pay the real price when you
You want a
use the
good
card.
example of that is I don't know if it's like this for you, but in the United States, we have a big thing with insurance companies, right? So you get really nice discounts if you're not a smoker, or if you have a car, you can put these little tracking devices in your car that will monitor how you drive, and if
There you
you're
go.
and if you drive good, then you get nice discounts on your insurance, right? So a lot of this stuff is driven by your desire to save money, and that's a willful thing that you're doing, right? Now, just a pop quiz here, Cliff. Didn't Aldous Huxley kind of paint that different picture that society would be open armed to their type of surveillance and Stockholm syndrome, if you will? Uh,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the old thing. Like, get any group, even back in school. If you go back to your school class, and if you were a good class, you're intelligent class, you got things done, you work well as a team, and then
mhm,
you get one or two bad apples and they're in the class and they hold the class back and it's blatantly obvious. Then the
sure,
people go, "Oh, we got to sort these guys out," you know. And even the teachers would say, you know, "Oh, because of Billy and Timmy, you've all got to stay in." See, so they turn the children on to the people to straighten them out. Again, they're using mob tactics, mob rule. So yeah, the people love their servitude, like Huxley said, because they give you logic and reason as to do it. It may not be true, but it's still logic and reason. So the people logic and reason, okay, that looks safe. And if I do act good, right? If I do drive exactly to the speed limit, I eat my GMO, I get my vaccines because they're not going to stop. I mean, look at the way they're pushing vaccines.
yep.
They will be mandatory or you'll get a social discredit.
It is in New York City.
Yeah,
In New York City, they just banned all children that are not vaccinated from public schools. So in New York City, if you're not vaccinated, your children, if they're not vaccinated, they cannot attend public schools. That's
yeah.
happening now. Uh, and that argument is made now, Cliff, for the insurance companies here. The argument is being made that, look, why, if somebody smokes and they drinks and they don't eat healthy, right? Those are the people that are running our insurance rates up. Why are they not being regulated and being forced? Because it's costing the public money. So that's the argument that's being
Yeah.
made, right? So
So
if it's me and I'm making this argument, my argument would be, look, why are my rates going up? Because Joe Schmo over here doesn't, he just wants to suck down double cheeseburgers and Cokes all day long, and he wants to smoke and drink and do whatever the hell he wants to do, running my rates up, the quality of my health insurance goes down, and I'm paying
yes,
for him to destroy his body. Why is that fair? That's
yeah,
the argument that's being made. It's that collective
absolutely.
punishment.
Yeah, and you can see that as we go down these rabbit holes, you can see that the technique of mass control over the individual is very effective and profitable for the government slash system slash corporations.
Hmm.
So this is how they've enslaved us. All these techniques put together have been perfected over time as we go through history.
Yep.
And but the cool thing is the truth of the matter is still the same issue, and that is, why do you need a third party to stand between you and any other transaction that you do.
Yep.
You know, I don't need a doctor. I'll be self-reliant. Oh, but hang on, they're not going to like that. Well, who's they? Well, the government. Well, they're going to watch you. Where? I didn't allow any camera on my property. Where? You know what I mean? So don't.
Yep.
All you do is don't participate in this shit. Don't contract. Don't sign
Yep.
anything. Don't don't buy the crap. Yeah.
Well, now, Cliff, this is the thing, is that the way this system is going to be set up. Remember now, Tencent. Go back to that example. Your social credit was affected by the completion of your account. Okay. So these systems are going to be set up that if you don't partake in these systems, your credit score will go lower. If you're not partaking in the system, your credit score is going to go lower. And remember also that your neighbors, they're also going to have a social credit score. And if you are interacting with them in some way or things aren't going well, their social credit score may in some way go down if they're even communicating with you, if it's anything like China, right? So these are all implications that can be put into place.
Sure. I still think though that the what you tell someone, anyone outside of your body,
Yep.
anyone that you talk to, you can specify the language that you use and what you say and what you do. And as you know, and as we'll get more guests on here, we're going to still be asking questions. So they're
Yeah.
going to say, they're going to assume something. Oh, you're not registered on the government watch thing. Well, why do you assume that? What evidence do you have of that? Well,
Sure.
you don't look like you've got the chip in your arm. Well, why do you assume that I needed a chip?
Right.
You know,
Right.
how does he know? How does he know anything? How does he know I don't have a secret chip and I've got special clearances and security clearances and all that stuff?
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
classified information. You know, so you use what I'm trying to get to is here. Sometimes in the public, you have to be devious to get out of it.
Sure.
Because that's how the elite get out of it is they don't register anything, and if they're confronted on any presumption of what they see to do with joinder to their body, see, this is why they want to chip us, because then there's joinder to the body. Without
Right.
that, there's no joinder. So
Well,
that's the key. If everyone's chipped once, and then all they need to do is get a tipping point to make it mandatory. But if people aren't chipped, or if people are chipped, then it's game over because they've now got attachment to the person and there's evidence.
yeah. I think what we're going to see here, Cliff, I think what we're going to see here, though, is that China was acceptable to it, right? They've done studies in China and found that 80% of the population there was okay with this system that they have, and so the people accepted it, pure and simple. It's quite disturbing that that's the case, and so we would have to ask ourselves, how could that ever happen in the United States? Well, the way that's going to be implemented is it is first normalized by the private sector. The private sector gets everyone used to these things. You're used to all this stuff. It's common practice, right? So for children going through a line and doing the same thing every day when they go to school, right? They have to pay for their food a certain way. That maybe the children start carrying little cards or something. They start swiping them every day. These things are all things in order to repetitively build in certain habits into your mind. And as the private sector repetitively pounds these little motions and these habits into your mind, it just becomes that much easier for the public to accept it once it gets to the governmental level or the systems level of actually implementing it into a law, right? So I think the private sector is going to normalize it, and that's just the first step. I'm sure eventually the goal would be to something like China has. However, there's no evidence of that right now. We do know that at least Larry Backer here would like to see private sector trying to do their best to replicate what we see in China. So let's go to the next little bit here he's got. We've only got a few more quotes. These closed loop systems of private social credit work well enough, but it is possible to socialize the masses or even mass democracies as a collective to embrace this pattern of data disclosure beyond these immediately self-serving closed loop systems. Would it be possible for the state to develop systems for the enforcement of laws, criminal and regulatory, that depends on intelligence by inducing the masses to serve as positive contributors of data necessary for enforcement or regulation? The answer, in Western liberal democracies, may depend on the ability of the great culture management machinery of Western society, its television, movies, and other related media to develop a narrative in which such activity is naturalized within Western culture. Okay, so here we are. He is advocating and telling us that the way to do this is through television. It is just through little habits that you'll pick up here and there. We need you to call in to American Idol and vote for your favorite star. It's all these little things. Or for example, there's been TV shows where there's been like an FBI's most wanted list, right? And they're encouraging everybody call in with all the information that you have. Or let's go back to George Bush. See something, say something, right? They just pound it over and over and over again. So I have just a short movie trailer that I want to show you. If you've never seen this movie before, you need to go watch this movie. It's with Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. It's called The Circle. Cliff, have you seen this movie?
Yes, I have, and it was very good. Yep.
It's a good movie. It's definitely a good movie. I enjoyed it. However, this movie lays out a platform for exactly, I think, what he is talking about here. It's called The Circle, and it's a massive social media platform, okay? It's a private sector company. And what they do is they start putting cameras everywhere that they can monitor everything, okay? Now, this actually transforms into Emma Watson putting a camera on her body so that everything she goes, when she goes to sleep, everywhere she goes, it's all monitored. Everything that she does is monitored. And it's done so because of the idea that if you are constantly being monitored by everybody in the world constantly, and everybody can see that everything that everyone is doing, then you'll be honest and you'll always do what's right, right? It's very disturbing. But let's take a look. I want you to watch this. Screen. Okay. Let's watch this together, guys.
How would you describe what the circle is to, say, your grandmother?
It's the chaos of the web made elegant.
Speed round, Paul or John?
Early Paul, late John.
Mario or Sonic?
Early Sonic, late Mario.
Needs of the society or needs of the individual?
Should be the same.
You're most scared of?
Unfulfilled potential.
I am a believer in the perfectibility of human beings. When we are our best selves, the possibilities are endless. At the circle, there isn't a problem that we cannot solve. We can cure any disease, and we can end hunger without secrets, without the hoarding of knowledge and information. We can finally realize our potential. Circlers, do you like to share? We will see it all. If it happens, we'll know. Imagine the human rights implications.
The human rights
There needs to be
implications.
accountability.
What is this?
The circle has the power to change everything.
It's only our lies that get us in trouble. Things we hide. We care about everybody you care about. Because knowing is good, but knowing everything is better.
Okay, so I think you get the idea, right? This is just one element that they can utilize to normalize these kind of things. Now, of course, in this movie, it Emma Watson at the end of the movie, exposes the owner of this company, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to ruin the movie for you because it is a good movie. You should go watch it. So I don't want to spoil it, but of course, it ends that way. But if you think for a moment that you can take 90% of a movie, plugging a certain idea of your mind, or a certain idea into your mind, only to say, "Oh no, actually, this is bad." At the very end of the movie, and I promise you, regardless of what the movie says in the end, I don't care if the movie says at the end, "Hey, this is a bad idea," I assure you, this is normalizing this into people's minds. It is giving that idea to people that, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe this wouldn't be a bad idea, right?
Yeah. All they need is the right crisis.
Exactly. All they need is the right crisis. That's a good way to put that, Cliff. That's exactly right. What is that? What do you think that crisis is, Cliff?
That's how they do it. Well, it could be a crisis of inconvenience. That's another way they do it. Any crisis, a individual crisis, a mental health crisis. I mean, people go, yay, the government's going to spend billions on mental health. Well, what does that mean? It means they're going to train you to how they want you to be mentally healthy.
Sure.
It's like they're the ones doing the shit on us that make us mentally unstable.
Well,
look at the... Yeah.
I'll tell you what I think is the perfect crisis that they have here, Cliff. And are you watching on YouTube right now? How much of a lag is there right now?
There'd be quite a bit for me.
Okay. I believe that the next crisis, the big crisis that we have right now, is climate change.
My message is that
hold on. So that's my opinion. When you say we need a big crisis, what better crisis than thousands of people saying, hey, if we don't do something massive, the world is literally going to end in 12 years and we are all going to die. I mean...
Yeah, and like last week's show, I mean, the Club of Rome said that we need the right crisis. We have to make it so, man is the enemy. I mean, here's a question for people to ponder, because we've been told that we come from apes and all that, and we came from amoebas, which is technically natural. We evolved out of the swamps. So, well, if that's the case, if you go and look up or ask Google, are humans natural? Or what is human nature? Or are humans natural? You'll find out that the presumption from Google, which is the global opinion, from the globalists again, is no, we're not. Nature is everything except the human. So there's an implication.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I think, but what if we have 12 years to stop everything, to completely reduce our carbon footprint, completely reduce CO2, and they truly believe that the world is going to end in 12 years, imagine what they would do to make that happen. Don't you think that this type of society that Larry Backer is advocating for would be utilized to assess how you are contributing to climate change?
Yeah,
how is your lifestyle?
Yeah,
right.
Your carbon footprint will be measured. They've already said, with the United Nations, etc., has said that they want to get it to a carbon card. Where you got your own personal carbon taxes.
Right.
And they're going to definitely ram it up people's ass to try and get joined to the person. Just like the cows, because we found out that the thing with the cows worked, and they'll start putting propaganda out on that, saying, "Oh, it's working," but we're going to have to just limit you people too.
Yeah. So imagine private sector companies, right? There's no government that says, "Hey, you guys, you can't sell cows anymore." But what if, similar to how Walmart has decided that they don't want to sell certain types of ammunition, what if they decide, hey, we're not going to sell hamburger meat or any meats at all anymore because thousands of acres of trees have been chopped down, and so oxygen has been reduced, and now farting cows has increased the methane output. So they decide that in order to do their part for climate change, they're not going to sell hamburger meat anymore. Is that their right? Do they have that right to do that?
Yeah, well, they do, because they've got their free will, and we want to keep our free will.
Right.
But the real problem is that, the tricky part of a perceived morality of the situation is that they'll say, well, our meat that we grow in the lab, which will be cloned, right? It'll grow. It'll be a meat that just grows, and you cut it off and sell it.
Fucking nasty.
And we'll go over that near the end, but that'll be where they're going with it. And then they say, but this one doesn't produce carbon.
Yeah.
It's got better nutrition, maybe they'll say, or whatever. It doesn't mean it's real. And then they'll say, but these farmers here, they're contributing to climate change. They can't see, so they get rid of all of that through law.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in, and then the people accept. They think, yeah, it tastes like, man, it's good and it's cheap. They'll probably even do that. They'll bring it in cheaper too, because they
Sure.
can, because they own the money system. As they come in cheaper. It's so simple. This is why
Now-
they just, yeah.
And we can just take that back again to the Club of Rome and the limits of growth. And we know that they want to control population, right? We know that. So God only knows what they're going to put in this food to help, reduce some of that. Of course, everyone, Mr. Bill Gates and his, hey, if we're successful with immunizations, maybe we can reduce the population, all these things are being utilized, I think, probably
Yeah.
to make all this
So-
happen.
Are there more quotes from that article? That you've got
I
to
do
read?
have some more, yeah. Let's see what I got
Okay.
here.
Yep.
Let's see. Close loops? No. Okay, we'll read through this one. I've got two more, and that is it. So we'll just read through these real quick. That way we can move on along. One might get the sense of this possibility of the socialization of norms that naturalize a societal obligation to actively and affirmatively provide data to the state or to a private sector enterprise exercising state of market functions. By considering the premise of a new television show that is set to debut on the CBS television network, that show, Wisdom of the Crowd, is based on a premise that is irresistible but also challenging for contemporary or traditional social ordering. Written by Humphrey, Wisdom of the Crowd is based on the Israeli format of the same name. Inspired by the notion that a million minds are better than one, it centers on a tech innovator who creates a cutting-edge crowdsourcing hub to solve his own daughter's murder, as well as revolutionizing crime solving in San Francisco. Humphrey executive produces with Kashet's Avi Nir, Alan Struzman, Peter Tragot, and Rachel Kaplan, I don't know, Dror Mashani, and Shira Haddad. These people have weird names. CBS Television Studios, where Humphrey is under an overall deal, produces through his Algorithm Entertainment banner in association with Universal Television, where Kashet Studios has a deal. So again, he's just talking about he's giving you an example here of how this TV network is making this normal again, just like I showed you the circle. Nothing too dramatic there. But in this, he does bring up a good example of law enforcement, right? So you could use private sector technology. And this is actually in the circle as well. They touched on this too. But this whole thing is around that. You can use this technology to send out an alert to millions of people and offer them some sort of incentive to say, find this person. And when they find them, they report them to the police, and boom, they're arrested. Now, that's nothing new. They've had that, for decades. For the longest time, they've had America's Most Wanted and stuff like that. They give you the whole story about what happened. And then, of course, they put out an alert and say, call this number if you know anything. And, of course, there's a $5,000 reward or something like that, right? So that's not really anything new. All right, this is the last quote. The premise isn't a leap into unknown territory. Western mass culture has been herded towards the acceptance of the value of this responsibility for some time. That herding comes from two quite distinct directions. In the first, there is entertainment and pleasure and real-time participation in reality and talent shows and contests. These include the call-in features of shows like The Voice, with a call-in or online voting feature for contestants. Mass society has been trained to share their views, that is, to provide data, as an aspect of participatory mass entertainment. In the second, there is participation in the exaction of justice against criminals, a premise already quite close to that of Wisdom of the Crowd. Shows like America's Most Wanted, I just talked about this, illustrate this approach. In this series, John Walsh, the father of a murdered child, hosts this show that illustrates crime stories which have led to the capture of hundreds of fugitives from the law. With as much luridness and accuracy as possible, various crimes are dramatically recreated with an appeal for any viewer with information as to the crime and to the perpetrators to call the show and the authorities and help the cause of justice. So this is all just social conditioning to prepare you for these kind of things. It's just a way of normalizing it, so that when, as they propose news systems that just resemble this mildly, you're much more likely to accept it. But little by little, it just becomes a convenience. Like you said, some of these things, hey, this little microchip that goes in here, it's a convenience, nothing to worry about.
Sure, exactly. And there's so many different psychological techniques being used that have worked in a way where the person has been formed up to teenagehood in general, and then they stunt the growth from there. So it's called arrested development. So they use childish techniques on us, where a classic example is if a boy is naughty in the classroom and then he gets found out and the teacher smacks him, the rest of the class will giggle and laugh,
Yeah.
And it's right. So now we go into the future, into adulthood, and now those very same people are watching Police 10-7, which they had here, which is showing you police pulling over people for all kinds of things, arresting them and hassling them and all that, and then you get them giggling and pointing the finger. See, he
And
shouldn't
it's
have done it.
entertainment
He's
for
bad.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.